Right, so today is Tuesday, and for many women and girls somewhere in Ghana, it means they can't cross the River Offin, which runs through the central and Ashanti regions, because it is a taboo, one that has been in place for decades. That means they can't cross to go to school if their school is across the river, and can't also cross to go to the market or engage in economic or commercial activity. That's on Tuesdays. Additionally, girls also cannot cross the river when they're menstruating. You may find it shocking in this day and age of social media and technological advancements spearheaded by women, but it's true. This old discriminatory tradition is hampering girl child education and limiting socio-economic activities of females. We have a special feature on the AM show. And then we'll also have women's rights activists and some NGOs involved in child welfare and the Ministry of Education join us to help us understand the situation and what can be done to abolish that taboo. Before then, though, let's watch the documentary put together by Jojo Kobna.
River Offin in both Central and Ashanti regions is very sacred. There is an unwritten rule in all communities along the river, and women should not cross it on Tuesdays. In the community of Dencha Chechere, this rule is enforced to the letter. Also, when women or girls are menstruating, they are forbidden from crossing. It is believed that the curse will befall the community when women break this taboo.
The river is having a god of man, so that thing is born on Tuesday. For this reason, it is the Tuesdays when the spirits revoke in the river, maybe some menstrual cycle and those things that we cannot mention of. So as if we mention those things or we detach that things to the river is unclean. So our people or our elderly men saw that all those things attached to women are unclean for that day, Tuesday, because that Tuesday, the gods or the ancestors of the river may having some pacification or something like that. So it's taboo for a woman to attend to the riverside on Tuesdays.
If I'm Dr. Samha, I didn't feel 14 years. I school. St. John Methodist Basic School, Mitzi Village, Pakapa Village. My best school at Tichere, and so as I'm a bandit, I'm crossing River and Sonamaba. Obo and Son, so I want to make cross the river if you say a taboo, then soon. So,
my friend Teresa Glover, I didn't feel 13 years, and I do Tuesdays and so a young man into me school boys and a young omo to me back.
Dorcas and Teresa and many other girls have to cross a river to get an education.
So we are currently crossing the Offin River, and the gods of this river are against girls like Teresa and then Dorcas from menstruating and crossing it. They're against that. They're also against them from crossing on sacred days such as Tuesdays. One very interesting thing is the gods are not against people who are mining in this river. It's quite interesting.
It's a journey where they have to cut through thick cocoa plantations for 1 hour. But on Tuesdays and on days that they menstruate, they cannot do that. It is an ancient taboo that is enforced even today. Women and girls are questioning the relevance of this taboo, what is affecting their education.
It is not fair. It is not fair because every day the boys go to school and study, but we the girls, we can't study all the days.
A peep through the school register shows the full story. Many girls who live across the river are absent from school. Young girls are now questioning this blatant discriminatory practice.
A little the boys no more school, na boys no more, and younger more woman saints, and what's me co school. A cushion, the agui and chin, almost ya, dear senior girls.
According to the girls, the boys do better in school because of this archaic belief.
We won't survive 5 days or 4 days. want me go school, ebi aboko school, ebi to aboko school kra na mo sua de gu achi ne mo sua na wu ne bia be ye de ba exams kra na no want me anye enti e problem e da ye ni girls aye ti baka pa hospital pa.
To give girls the best education, some parents have rented rooms in Chichere so the girls would return to them on weekends and when they are not menstruating.
Me bad doctors say why ayi kakra say asan say on to me go school nti brother ntina me say on go eklom say anso boys for mu say wo mu anka kra dia na say eklom dia anka matumi ahwe no su yi.
Ama Mansa recounts going into labor on a Tuesday. According to her, crossing the river was not possible because of the taboo. The chief of her community, who has a responsibility to appease to the gods of the river with a goat and gin before she could cross, was not around. So she had to walk for over 2 hours westwards before accessing a health facility to deliver.
I want to come a brand how much 30th March and I come here. I did a panel. Na mbra come ya na megina na mi like na eya de eya me ya but eya say ase ato me kakra na te say ntumi na ante kakra akra saa be pima me kodu nsu na me bon ba say nyame nya de onya me kakra akra ntumi ntwa me kodu krom kwan de na say ba de mpo a ende den hu say doctor for ye den mu gina me so na ha de omo so omo ntumi ma ti die wa na be ne kakra akra de akonti na me bom pa esungu nyame so say ommoa me am ti me twensu na me kodu kroma doctor for so ati me ayo de.
Ama could easily have died because of this taboo or lost her baby. She does not want to challenge the river god and the old age culture. She simply wants the government to build a bridge over the river so they can cross at will. Margaret Kokoi's son drowned in the River Offin. Her son was on his way to school when the canoe accidentally capsized and he died. Anytime she crosses the river, she recollects this painful memory. She wants the government to build a bridge over the river so that no child would cross the river to school.
Onunka yesi jwada bia mu de duane mla na saa da no saa kwada no wan fama na mimi ba no de mu de duane ko iti papa no bufu yi na o se so mo afa duane na ma ndi o mo ankasa mfa ehye no iti o mu di hye no ko no na akwada no antimi bio na afi na papa no ko ji ya hye no ko butu wo oduru ha na wa kai se mi ba no wo ka ba distanka bebi o ka nya ebia o pepe so bia obetimi abehwe me na sisi aso yinti wa free mu prefu bretama onyini.
Until then, this discriminatory practice would continue to hinder the development of girls and women. Jojo Kobna, Joy News.
Right, so that's the documentary put together by Jojo Kobna, and yes, it's happening. It's shocking, but it's true. In this day of technological advancement, and we have so much going on for us, and yet women cannot cross a river because it's a Tuesday and because they're menstruating. But one of the things that stood out for me in the documentary, which Jojo Kobna highlighted, is the fact that if you look at the river, there's galamsey taking place, and they're actually polluting the river.
The river.
And the gods are not angry enough. I feel that maybe it's just a myth, and maybe if anybody challenged it, we can overcome it. But you can't also dismiss the fact that if people believe in something, if they attempt to defy it, they could pay for it.
Yeah. I don't think it's a matter of defiance at this point. I think that we have to honor the traditions that we have and find a way to make it work for us. So for example, I want, to have a conversation with, some of these old people, traditional priests, whatever, about how do we pacify the gods of the river, or how do we get permission from the gods of the river to allow these girls to be able to do what they need to do. Now, the reason I'm using this approach is not necessarily because that's what I believe in, but because I've come to realize that there are traditions that we have as Africans. There are gods that we revere as Africans. And there's a certain power, undeniable, about the collective belief of a group of people, which has ramifications. I mean, call it karma, call it energy, call it whatever you will. So the reality of the situation is that permission must be sought, the gods or the elders must be pacified, and all of this must be done in such a way that we keep our eyes on the goal and do what needs to be done so that we get to the goal, which is having the girls able to go to school or having the girls, able to cross when they're menstruating. So I think that that's something that we have to do. What's interesting about this particular one is I think this is a good case study for us, and we need to tackle this so that we can tackle everywhere else that these things happen. And yeah, okay. All right, so we're going to have a conversation. I'm going to stop ranting now with Dinah Adiko. She's a women's rights advocate, and Esther Asenso Ajiman, women's rights advocate and PhD candidate. Also, Bright Apia, Child Rights International will also be joining us. Also, we will be joined by the Deputy Education Minister. So, very interesting conversation we're about to have. You don't even want to get up and get coffee, trust me you don't. So let's get straight into the conversation. And so we have Dinah, Esther, Bright Apia, and then the Deputy Minister of Education joining us. Good morning to all of you, and thank you so much for taking time out to have this conversation with us this morning.
Good morning, anymore. Good morning, Israel.
Hi, Dinah. Okay, hi, Dinah. Hi, Bright. Hello, Bright. Good morning. Can you unmute for us, please?
And good morning, Dinah and Israel.
Hi, good morning. I think Esther is on as well now. So let me start with you, Dinah. When you heard about this, or if you've watched the documentary, how did it make you feel, first of all?
Well, apologies. You can see that I'm sitting in a vehicle. I was on my way for a meeting. I didn't get to destination, and then it's time to get on the call. So apologies for the background. I hope the sound is okay.
Yes.
When I saw the video, it just recalls all the many struggles that women and girls are going through in Africa, in Ghana, and around the world. It points to a number of restrictions that the system, society, has put on women at all fronts. I mean, across board, there's so many restrictions on women because in as much as they are in society, we have our taboos and our culture and our practices. You notice that many of the taboos and restrictions in society are targeted at women and girls. Run through all and there's one thing about culture, and then there's another about harmful traditional practices. I think our conversation this morning on this subject is linked to other harmful traditional practices, and with emphasis on harmful. We love our culture. We believe in our heritage. We actually want to keep it for generations to come. However, in our quest to maintain our culture and our identity as a people, as Ghanaians and Africans, we're also minded by the fact that some of the practices have evolved or have been established to be harmful to the development of some group of people. And this is one classic example. Anymore, this also brings to the conversations around taboos related to food. Do you know that some pregnant women are prohibited from eating certain kinds of food, particularly those that are needed for their health? For example, as simple as egg. And what is the reason? The reason is that for some cultures, the reason is the unborn baby may get accustomed to you spoil the child, just to put it very basic, would get interested in eating good food and may become a thief, maybe. So it cuts across in so many different levels. And what is the consequence? Women's economic life is suspended for a day or for the period for which they are menstruating. Girls cannot go to school, and count the number of days girls menstruate plus all the Tuesdays in the term.
Yeah.
And you just tell how long they are missing lessons and what that has to do on their life. So harmful traditional practices exist, but it's interesting if you begin to analyze one practice after the other, you know that at the center of it are women and girls. Hardly will you see a practice that restricts men. Let's take it from FGM. Let's go to the Trokosi system, taboos related to food and movement, and all of that. It comes back to the fact that at the center of restrictions in society in the name of upholding tradition are women, and therefore we need to have a conversation. I agree with your introduction that we can just not up and rebel against a system. We are supposed to be very calculated in how we engage, because these are things people have believed in. The people who are gatekeeping these practices are not necessarily the people who instituted it. They came to meet it, they believe in it, they protected it all this while. It will be difficult to show up in that community and start putting restrictions on them. Having said that, also there are laws in every country. In Ghana, there are laws on anti-discrimination laws and all of that. So how do we engage on these things to work with these communities in a very careful, respectful way, but get these practices out of their way so people can live their lives?
Well, thank you very much for that, Dinah. Absolutely agree with you, everything that you said. Let me have a quick chat with Esther. Esther Asenso Ajiman is the women's rights advocate and PhD candidate. Esther, so, I mean, first question, how did you feel, or how do you feel, you know, when you discover, and I'm sure that you're aware of many more of such taboos, how do you feel about some of these things that are still affecting women? And if you can really just explain to us, if you're aware of what the particular issue is concerning women's menstruation, because it cuts across so many different religious practices that there's just something around a woman who, you know, is shedding womb lining. What exactly is the problem with that?
Okay, thank you very much, Animwa. Good morning to you and good morning to our viewers. And I agree with the first speaker, Dinah, on her position and everything that she said. And moving on, I think that we need to situate this conversation within the broader discourse of development or social change and tradition. I mean, when you look at the character of tradition, tradition is more or less static and oriented to the past, whereas development or social change is dynamic and oriented towards the present and the future. So when any time that we have had to merge or think about how to marry tradition with development, in some instances we have some of these challenges where tradition sometimes stands in the way of development. And I think that is exactly what is happening here in the case of women or girls not able to cross the river on Tuesdays, and also not to cross when they are in their period or when they are menstruating. And to answer the question about, I mean, what is it about menstruation that has generated a lot of taboos and all that? And I think it's situated in this distinctions of clean and unclean, and in a number of religious practices that there's an idea or a distinction between what is clean and what is not clean. And I believe that in most animist faith or traditional religious beliefs, it's hold generally that when a woman is in her menses, she's an unclean person at that time, and therefore must be separated from what is sacred and what is hold in high esteem, so that, I mean, she will not create pollution and blah 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 blah. But I believe that these are things that we can engage with, because education in itself has intrinsic and instrumental value. You know, you educate someone because it is important for the person to understand his or her world, and also understand how the world operates. And also education is also relevant even in our pursuit of development, beginning with the fact that it creates avenues for social mobility through maybe the job that you earn and the income that will accrue to you. It also helps to move forward our development agenda, and so I believe that anything that stands in the way of achieving the intrinsic and instrumental value of education, we have to engage with it, but not forgetting that we also need to be mindful that tradition is a social fact. A lot of cultures, or every culture has its own tradition, but those that stand in the way of development must be challenged and engaged with appropriately. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Esther. And I see you try to situate this whole thing in a certain context and not to rubbish our cultures and traditions. And indeed, if we have to go back or look at our cultures and traditions, there's very good reason why they would come up with something, a taboo, or some of these things, the practices that we're talking about. And so I agree with you when you say that we probably should go back and get to understand the source or the origin of some of these traditions, so that it will help us if we are trying to get rid of them. But I'll bring in Writer Pia of Child Rights International and ask him how do we approach trying to deal with some of these traditional beliefs and practices?
Well, thank you very much. And I will build my point on what your other colleague raised, the valid point that she made on the fact that tradition is very powerful and people believe so much in it. So when you are taking it, you also have to be very careful how you approach it. But looking at it from the child's right perspective, you could see that there's a clash between the right to education of the girl child and then culture. And when that happens, there's a clear way out for us to determine as to what is necessary for the development of the child. We know that when it comes to the right of education, even at the global level, it is compulsory and it must be free. That is the kind of commitment given to various states to ensure. Then you also look at our constitution. It is something that we can enforce to ensure that nothing would impede that process for the enjoyment of the right to education. So if you pick the two, then we also need to balance it to see which one is more relevant in terms of the development of our children, and what understanding do we want them to have within the cultural context. Because just as the last lady said, there's a history to it, and you also laid emphasis on it, that there's a history to it. And all these things must be clearly, we must have clear understanding of all those things so that we can place it in the context. But whatever it is, our legislation is so clear that anything that will impede on the right to education should be considered as a bad practice. Therefore, there must be a way for us to deal with it. In any case, if it is about women being in their menstruation, or the girl child being in their menstruation to access education, there are so many ways that a child can keep herself to have access to education that will not have any effect on the cultural practices, whether it is a taboo for them to cross the river or not. So we also have to find ways and means to also handle that cultural aspect in the context in which they understand it, so that we can still pave way for the girl child to have access to education. The simplest thing that we have done in respect to these menstruation and crossing river and not going to a certain areas in a particular time is purely based on the society considering people who are in menstruation as unclean. And now there's a modern way of making it so clean for people to have access to wherever they want to go, engage in all kinds of activities that they want to engage in and all that. So it is the understanding that we need to provide. But I strongly believe that if you have a culture that first denies children their right to protection, deny children their right to survival and development, deny them their right to participation and having a right to education, the state must also sit down and look at it and say that this is a bad practice. It's hindering the progress of our children, it's hindering their development. And if this is the way culture wants to go, then we also need to find our way out to ensure that they have access to education. But when you pick the law, a right to education supersedes that of culture. So we need to respect that in relation to children. I'm saying this in relation to children because our laws make a special case for the girl child and their children. So these are things that, for me, we have to look at. First, provide the understanding of what culture is seeking to do in respect to this kind of menstruation. Once we're able to do that, I think that we will find a way out to deal with this particular case where our children will have access to education.
And Bright, just a quick one. How is it that we have almost managed to overlook some of these things that have gone on for, hundreds of years? How is it that in this day and age we're now having to deal with these things? What exactly was the problem?
Yeah, I think that it's all about commitment, because I can tell you that even way back as 1993, when we take the giant step to formulate policies that protect the right of children, there's a document that we developed. We call it "The Child Cannot Wait." And there are two things that we distinguish in that law. That we say that poverty and culture will not be a hindrance to the development of children. So if you look at most of the laws that we did, it builds on the principle of welfare. So clearly, we have defined a way out for the development of our children. So it is just a matter of commitment that we have not shown, or even if there are cultural issues, there's a way that we can engage with people or the traditional authorities. We've done that in certain areas, and they've accepted it, and they are working with it. So it's a commitment that is lacking in this process. That's why we are still seeing this kind of negative practices having effect on our children.
All right, so we all agree, all of us on this in this conversation, Esther, Diana, Bright, yourself, and Nimwa, and myself, we all agree that these are cultural norms and practices that we cannot just do away with. We cannot wish away. These are things that people respect. And we also agree that the children have a right to education, and the women should also freely go about engaging in their economic and commercial activities. But if we said, all right, let's do away with this practice, the children can cross the river on Tuesdays, and the women can cross when they're having their menstruation, you'd appreciate that no woman will cross the river, right? And I'm putting this to all of you.
Well, I don't know, because there are instances where traditional authorities, when they allow certain practices to take place, they perform certain rituals within their context. I don't believe in those things, though, but they perform those rituals that they deem to pave the way for the practice of those cultures and all that. So the same system can be adopted to do that. And I don't think that, it's a culture. And once it's something that exists in the community, everybody will be under that obligation to perform it. Because I even went to Ebusumtri, the river there, and there's a lot of mysteries around it. And because of that, certain people are not performing certain activities around the river at a certain times, looking at the history and all that. So they believe in it. So if you don't take a lot of education to let them understand that this is what it is, then they will still hold on to that kind of belief. For that matter, they will not even if the system allow it, or the cultural system allow it, they would even participate in the process and all that. So once we want to do that engagement, then some level of understanding must also come to bear on how we can have that done so that our children will be free. The most important thing is that we cannot use culture to hinder development of our children. Already, in the rural areas, time on task is a problem. So if you have children missing Tuesdays because they're in their menses, they miss Tuesdays, within a month, let's even say that we have about people they menstruate periodically or every month. You realize that children will be missing about 8 hours, more than 8 hours, even within a month. And that is going to also affect their performance. So clearly, once we have defined that education is the way forward for the development of our children, we should try to remove all the impediment to pave the way for the enjoyment of right. And the traditional authorities must also come to understand that, so that together we can move the practice forward.
Yeah, and yes, I was making that exactly the point you're making, and which is, we can't do this without the traditional authorities. We can't just say that, because if you say that, yes, we've abolished this taboo, or the state comes in and says, let's get rid of this taboo, people will still not cross until they have the assurance from the traditional authorities that you can go ahead to cross it. And so I'm asking what the approach should be. And I want to bring in Dinah at this point. Dinah, how do you suggest we go about this?
I think Bright had hinted already that we cannot bypass traditional authority and get around this. You've indicated very truly that it will backfire. So it has to be from a point of awareness. I think some of these taboos emerge out of the mystery around, for example, menstruation. Many people in the past, they don't understand how a woman or a young girl would bleed for 5 days, and then she's dry again, and then she begins to bleed. So the mystery around it made them to find solutions in a way that they were comfortable with. Now that there's science to explain what menstruation is, and it's not as filthy as the world thought it was, it will be easy to use that science to engage with traditional authority, to use the evidence of poor performance of girls in schools and economic struggles of women as an evidence to engage with them and say, do you think we would be better off if we allow women to have access to certain spaces without limitation or limits? And if they agree, it's not going to be a one-off session or effort. Over a period of time, show other communities, we can use success stories of other communities who took that bold step, who changed some of these practices, and they had the freedom to develop. Use the evidence of that. Use the evidence of the difficulties and negative impact of their current practice. Show the evidence that menstruation is not mysterious, it's not evil, it's not filthy as people thought. Explain how it came about or it comes about, and then agree with them. Bright said something. We've seen other communities where they went together to the riverside. They needed 9 days, 7 days, 14 days to perform the ritual, to free the space for women to engage and girls to engage in. If that is done, women will courageously use across the river anytime. But before then, nobody, and you are very right, is going to instruct. But people believe in these things, especially when you cannot explain it, you don't dare it, because they are not sure what the consequence would be. We heard the story of the little boy who drowned. If I understood what the woman said, it had something to do with the failure to perform a certain ritual, and along the way, in the process, somebody lost his life. So it goes back to even strengthening the system they have put in place. And therefore, we cannot just outlaw it, criminalize it, and make headway. It doesn't work. Take FGM, for example. When it was outlawed in Ghana, people crossed the Burkina Faso to go and have their children circumcised because they believed that it had to be. So there has to be thorough engagement, awareness, and it must be led by the traditional authority and the people themselves, based on the understanding they have. Otherwise, we'll talk about this for as long as we so desire. We may not get the results we want.
All right, let me come to you, Esther, and I'm asking you in your capacity as a PhD candidate. I'm sure you've seen this over and over and over again. How much of a climb, an uphill climb, do we really have if we want to be able to tackle this thing? Every time we talk about things that have to do with women, where the power to liberate and the power to set free is in the hands of men, I ask myself this question. We have to convince the men that giving us or allowing, it hurts me to say allowing, or giving us the access and the freedom will cost them some sort of power, cost them, some sort of influence in freeing up women to be everything that they can be. So we're talking about these traditional, leaders and all of that, and most of them are men. How do we convince them that there is benefits in giving women the kind of access that ultimately gives them the kind of power that men have? How much of an uphill climb do we really have in order to be able to do this?
Yeah, thank you very much, Animwe, and thank you, Dinah and Bright, for the contributions. I agree with all that you mentioned, particularly engaging with our traditional leaders and gatekeepers, creating awareness, and so that the needed behavioral change can occur. And indeed, there's an uphill climb, particularly looking at the context where we want to bring about this change. It's a closely knit community, and the kind of bond that connects the people are very, very high. So whereas in other contexts, like in urban areas, because people have moved in from various social backgrounds, when you and the role of migrant in leading change helps to propel the needed behavioral change even among the indigents. And indeed, usually when we think about engaging with men in terms of gender issues, we mostly conceive of power as a zero-sum game, which means that the more you have, the less I will have. And I think that is not the whole story about power sharing. We have various centers of power where people can have as much as they want and still allow others to also have the same thing and might not come in their way, And so it's important for us to think about how we operationalize this change, given that the community is so closely knit. And one of the things I would want to bring our attention to is that even though we can lead the change, just like we have all noted, even though we can lead the change, propelling the people to accept and accept the change that will bring about the results we are requesting might not be easy. But indeed, when we begin, results might be mixed, but over time, change can happen, and I believe it's something we should do to make sure that this practice does not stand in the way of the development of women and girls in the community. Thank you very much.
Because so quickly, we are all finding ways on how to resolve this thing. Now, I want to ask you, Bright, who should lead this? So we decide that, yes, let's engage the traditional authorities. Who should start the conversation?
Power, we have issues of this nature. We have power given to institutions to handle, unless those institutions deem it fit to give that power to somebody else to do it on their behalf. So you expect that I, in this case, would look at the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection, with the Ministry of Education, and also the Interior Ministry to handle these particular cases in a manner that would also help them. Initially, some of these things were placed under employment and social welfare, but now we have a different assignment altogether. So we expect this institution to take the matter up so that we can see to the smooth transition of these cultures to pave way for our children. So basically that is what it is. And sometimes it's a bit difficult when to answer some of these questions, looking at the history of the ministries and what we have experienced from them in the past when it comes to these cultural practices and all that. You remember the witch camp, you remember the trocracy system. They led it and they brought some kind of changes in those areas, though we're still perfecting it. But they led the process. And once they lead the process, you'll see that other institutions would also come on board to ensure that things are done. And now there's a whole campaign about government even giving free sanitary pads to girls. So it falls within their domain perfectly to also look at how to remove some of these cultural practices to pave way for these policies to also be in place.
All right, so Bright mentions three ministries. Esther, do you agree we should let those three ministries or governments lead this?
I think that the points or the centers of change can be varied, and I agree that government indeed has a role to play. But we can also think about community level mobilization and the role of civil society. And I think that these other agents can also propel the change. And in Ghana currently, the experience of or how people encounter the state in various spaces differs. So when you move from urban areas to rural areas, you really notice that the presence of the state or the government is really minimal. And so in some instances, even though we believe that we live in a nation that is modernized, where the state has power over tradition and all that, I think that there could also be other actors who may also have influence as much as the government. And in a number of communities, they have community consultations where they engage with various stakeholders like churches, women's group in the community and all that. And I think that some of these groups can be empowered to give them the voice to bring forth some of the changes that we are thinking about. And a number of civil society organizations are also involved. Bright is with an NGO, and they can also lead the change that we want to see. Thank you.
All right, so Dinah, I'll bring you in at this point. We've identified one major way or one key way to resolve this. Engage the traditional authorities so that probably we can have one huge pacification right. And I would want to believe that it will depend on the community. So we have to do this community by community, because the River Offin it runs through 2 regions. And there'll be several communities along the course of the river. So you would have to move from community to perform these things, and as you've indicated, the government should lead. That's one way of dealing with it. But in the feature that Jojo put together, there's a suggestion that we probably should have a bridge. Because let's face fact, it's not even safe having the people cross the river, whether they're doing it on Tuesday, but if someone has to go to school and they have to cross a river, that's quite dangerous. So maybe we should be looking at the other options, having a bridge, not so costly bridge that would straddle or go across the river at different intersections and communities. Again, this comes to government or falls on government. But of course, there are organizations too that can take it upon themselves to mobilize resources to get this done. Dinah, what do you think of that?
Yeah, you're totally right. And when there's a problem or a situation, we look at the options we have. There are so many options. And one of it is, it's even safe to have a bridge. When there's a river and people have to connect to the other side of the river, we all know it's very safe to have a bridge. So it goes without saying, and that community obviously desperately needs a bridge. Having said that, this is a situation that instead of, every community needs its own development based on the needs of the community. But we can talk about a bridge. It might not be the full solution to harmful traditional practices. When the practice is harmful to the development and the well-being of some groups of people, and in extension the entire community, it is important to have a conversation about it. If you could introduce a bridge and then see women crossing it as a beginning point for having that conversation, but these conversations need to be had because they are harmful in so many different ways. So yes, the bridge is very critical, but what are those things that bring restrictions on the movement of other people and categorizing some people as a threat to the well-being of the community? We need to begin to engage, especially now that we have an understanding of why some of the things are the way they are. Formally, I hear some of this, no going to farm on a certain day, no going to the river on a certain day, were introduced as a way of breaks. People needed to take a break from long, hard work. And so they brought these systems about. But the same communities who are holding on to these ones that are restricting, they are easily using mobile phones. They've switched onto technology. They are using vehicles. They are driving in and out. They are open to all forms of change. So let us encourage them to embrace change that liberates other groups of people. Let's begin to understand why some kinds of restrictions are meant for only a certain category of people. And when we have those conversations, the bigger issues of restrictions and limitations on women, and the fact that a few people have to make decisions about the rest of the community members would also be addressed in that process. So it's a bigger conversation not only about restrictions tied to taboos, but it also tells on the role, participation, and voice of women and children in such communities. It just tells you who makes the decision. It tells you when they gather together, who speaks. What days do they even gather? Do they gather on a Tuesday at the other side of the river also, which has introduced another culture of eliminating some people's voice in decision making? So if you begin to digest and interrogate this and unpack it, you are going to find different elements of discrimination and restriction that need to be addressed. So I agree with the bridge, but it would not be a reason to shove the conversation that this practice is harmful and we cannot continue with it.
Yes,
to show up in it, sometimes it's relocating the problem. The bridge will come, but we'll find other ways to make sure menstruating women and girls do not participate in something else, just to continue to worship the part about menstruation and restrictions.
Does it not then say, Dinah, that obviously that the problem has to be tackled? The core problem of the taboo has to be tackled before we start to find, other ways of dealing with the problem. I was even going to suggest, maybe actually coming to build a school in that area so that the children don't actually have to cross the river. But then are we only going to have male teachers? Because if they're female teachers, they can't cross the river from the other villages to come and teach. So regardless of what measure we put in place, ultimately we're going to have to tackle
the root.
Exactly.
The root of it.
The menstruation.
The root of it. So the menstruation part and the whole mystery about it, and there's so much myth about menstruation. It's high time we open this conversation up across the country. I know a lot of civil society organizations and groups are doing so much work to increase awareness and understanding our menstruation and pregnancy. So it's just pushing that conversation a bit up. And if we put a school up, we're still going to deal with that restriction about not crossing. And you cannot move everything to one part. People have to move about. Why should we restrict people's movement? And because, okay, we brought you to school so you can't move. So it's very important to have that conversation. So I will add the Ghana Health Service to the group of people that Esther and Bright have listed. Civil society extremely critical. They kind of have the instruments and the tools and strategies to engage communities in ways that we've seen profound results and progress. So I think when Ministry of Gender is brought on board, the Health Ministry of Education comes on board, the Health Service is on board, we get civil society strongly in there as the strongest partner because they have a strong way of engaging communities. I heard Bright talking about interior. They will strategically be brought on board so then people are not frightened or intimidated by the officers they introduce and all of that. And everybody, we heard about religious bodies and all of that. We have to have that conversation gradually but consistently. We don't go in one and say the people have refused. We have to make a strong case for why this is not a way to go, and then we can cause a change. But the bridge is one, a school closer to them is one, and bringing the bridge and the school solve a lot of other problems apart from crossing the women and girls not crossing the river. But then we have to have that conversation. It's long overdue. It's been done in other parts of the country. We can do it in these communities.
Okay, I just want to ask Bright a really quick question. Bright, in your experience, all the years that you've been, advocating for children's rights, apart from, your organization and a few, maybe other, CSOs, a few other media houses and stuff, do you really get the feeling that anybody really cares about whether this is changed or not?
Oh, yes. There are a lot of people who cares about these issues. And I must commend the media space for always exposing some of these issues and all that. And the NGOs are doing perfectly well. When it comes to developmental issues in this country, I can say that the civil society organizations are taking the lead in finding ways and means to deal with some of the ills within our society that is having effect on women, children, persons with disability and all that. So there's that recognition. And what we need to add is for us to see how the state can also have a full frame of the whole issue so that when you are discussing, it's not as if we are exposing the state, but rather we are contributing to the development of the state and all that. So,
but Bright, must we apologize for exposing the state? I mean, must we actually apologize for exposing the state, or for saying that it's 2021 and in the Republic of Ghana there are still places and villages where girls cannot go to school because they cannot cross a river, and the government doesn't really seem to give two hoots whether it's done or not? Especially, it's not as if this river is like some unknown river in the middle of a jungle where there's no access. Look at the color of the river. There's so much illegal mining going on there. So there's nothing that can convince me that the players of the government are not aware of the things that are going on in those areas, even just based on the fact that they may have gone there to inspect what goes on with the river. Do you get what I mean? So when we suddenly make it, seem like, oh, we're not exposing the state. No, I'm exposing the government this morning because I am upset about it. And the fact that it's about time something is done. I want to know what the Minister of Gender and Social Welfare thinks about this. This is what she's supposed to be dealing with. And yet we're still doing this, the gender, welfare, child protection, everything that goes under her ministry. And yet we're still dealing with this. And we're having these conversations. And I'm thinking to myself that after we have this conversation, is anybody going to care enough to actually take it a step further? Because the truth is that Israel and I cannot go there and go and negotiate with the traditional leaders. We don't have the power to do that. But the people that have the power, are they actually going to do it? Does it matter to them if there's no profit to be made, if there's no money to be made?
Yeah, you see, the work that you've done and what others are doing, is to draw the attention of government.
We've been drawing the attention for a very long time.
Whether we are exposing them or not, the state must take it in good faith and then operate with it. That's exactly what I'm trying to say. The state should not see the work being done to expose some of these things or bringing some of these into their attention as an attack, but rather we'd have to pick the issues and deal with them, because these are things that are affecting all of us. And the last count of the investment that we've made in education is in billions. So if you see a certain class of people being denied as a result of cultural practices, then it means that the investment that the state is putting in our education will go to waste. So clearly, these are issues that we need to deal with, and I don't think that we just have to massage the issue. But what I'm trying to say is that the state must always see this as an opportunity to go into a venture where their investment will be protected, so that we don't have any child losing in the process of all these cultural practices that we have. So clearly, we have to pursue the matter, and for us as an organization, we have pursued a lot of issues. And if let me just even give you a small history of the thing that has happened in the past. If you look at when we passed the Children's Act, a lot of work that was done by the late Honorable Ama Benuado on some of these things. You come to the time that the late Honorable Gladys Asma was developing the gender ministry, the lot of work that gone into it, the work that they've done around it. So clearly, if government take the lead, if government recognizes that I want to do this, they always have the capacity to do that. That's why we are saying that, yes, they have to take some of these things in good faith so that they can operate with it, so that at the end of the day, it is the life of our children that we want to save. So that is what should matter to all of us.
All right, so I think we should be looking at the way forward. We all agree that there's something that can be done. Bright is suggesting that we bring in the state. He mentions a number of ministries that he feels should lead. But let's for a moment imagine that government will not lead it, or the state will not lead it. Can all of us here in this conversation just commit that we could, Bright, for instance, your NGO has been around and has done some incredible work. Could you, together with Esther and Dinah, probably come together and say that you're going to take it upon yourselves to want to maybe approach some influential traditional leaders in this country who, when they speak, all the other traditional leaders may want to, fall in line and want to do something about it. Could you probably want to take it up as a campaign? We can call you the coalition of women's rights advocates, advocating for the abolition of taboos across the country.
Wow. Oh, it's wrong.
This portfolio is so huge, but whatever it is that we need to do to protect the interests of children, I can promise that Child Rights International will be on board.
All right. How about you, Esther and Dinah?
Yes, I think it's a laudable initiative, though daunting but not undoable. I think commitment of individuals have over in various spaces brought about remarkable changes, and I think it's something I am really looking forward to. Yeah, thanks.
All right, Dinah.
Israel, it's what, today is Tuesday, right?
Yes.
Early in the week, commitment. Well, so let me say that evidence that civil society has actually led change for such behavior. I remember before the closure of the week, one of the witch camps in the northern region, that effort was led by Taboo, and it's an NGO, and the Action Aid. And when they had engaged community leaders, traditional leaders, the alleged women who were alleged to be witches and all of that, and they got to that point where they agreed that that particular witch camp could be closed and the women reintegrated. They brought the agenda to the Ministry of Gender, who endorsed, supported it, and then took it up and finished to the closure of that camp, and the women were reintegrated. So we've seen civil society and individuals lead such campaign, and it's been successful time after time after time. You need to be strategic about it, you need to be targeted. And I agree, when we're struggling to deal with issues of child marriage at a point, we went through the National House of Chiefs, where we had representation for all the regions and all of that. And these members of the House of Chiefs began to pick it up in their region. I didn't see that process to the end, but I believe that if it was followed through, we would see leadership change coming from within, but from the top. You get that kind of scenario. So it's a good idea that individuals can be committed to this. I think the person who wants to lead it will be Jojo Kobna, who brought this documentary up. So he will be the president of this group. But it can be run, it can be done, but we should get the right. There are people already, there are civil society groups and organizations already in those communities. We can't sidestep them. We would have to relook at who is working in those communities. What have they done so far? What has been their biggest challenge, and what support do they need? But we are not going to hold brief for government for stepping the gap. We think one of our roles as activists will be to remind the government that there are gaps. When Bright said we didn't look like we are telling the government, I think what he's saying is that we don't want to work outside government, but we probably want to work in partnership as a team on these issues, and not only to call them out and sit and see whether they will fail or they will not. But working in partnership, we are not going to fill the gap for government. Government has all it takes and it needs to get change done, and we have to remind them continuously and consistently that they should get the work done with our support. But individuals, we can do activism and engage and lobby and all of that, but hey, at the end of the day, the buck stops with government. Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection should be at the forefront of this. If it's slipped off their radar, we are reminding them now, and we believe that somebody in charge, Department of Children and Department of Gender, will come together and invite the right stakeholders around the table, and we should get this one story at a time. This one that has been revealed by Jojo and Joy News should be addressed, and we use that as a sample as a template to follow through the rest. No excuses.
All right, so we have a number of people who have been watching the show and following the conversation, and they'll be commenting on Facebook. Let's get on to Facebook now and bring you some of the comments that they have.
Okay, so Basing Diallo Ketigwe says, we won't have this conversation if Ghana was developed and had footbridges across rivers that are deemed abominable for the female child to cross on Tuesdays. Let's deal with the traditional celebration of our independence. What's Ghana free from? The white man or herself? In fact, Ghana needs freedom from herself. Okay, let's take a couple more. Rules and regulations must be obeyed. This is just a simple direction. Okay, Rolex.
And yes, Rolex, we're not saying that rules and regulations must be disregarded. We're actually having the conversation in the context of approaching the traditional authorities and speaking to them about some of these things and having them probably have another look at them. So Rolex, we're not saying that we're doing away with the traditions and cultures. All through the conversation, we have made it clear that we respect the traditions and the cultures and all the beliefs. Let's get some more of the comments on Facebook.
Okay, Alexander says, let's respect our culture. It's just Tuesday alone, no problem. Actually, it's not just Tuesday alone. It's Tuesdays and the length of period that a woman is menstruating for, which runs from 3 to 7 days every month. So it's a minimum of 10 days every month that the girl cannot go to school. So not really just Tuesdays. Let's take a few more comments on our screen. Okay, Mike MK Jr. says, I used to cross Tano in the night for studies in Techiman until I spoke Yawa against it. Ask me what happened the following night. Mr. Blogger, be bold and give it a try. If you're a female, just walk and cross, or if you're a man, just send your wife and let her walk and cross, and then boom, you come back and write your second article with, I can't literally read what you're saying. Okay, Jackson, example, you call your tradition old and discriminatory, but if a pastor is to give you a direction or any form of prophecy, it's taken as divine intervention. Wise up, bro. I think we didn't call the tradition old and discriminatory, but okay. Samuel says, tradition must be safeguarded and respected. This is what makes us who we are. Can't a path be created to ease movements for them? Let's respect who we are. I think that's the point that we're making about
Let's get the replies. Let's get into the replies and see what people are saying. Okay, so Kuga, please, you go there yourself. No one will stop you.
Okay, Samuel says, sweetie, you see, back in the days before the white man came, we lived in peace, and hardly will you hear of this sad moment that has engulfed us now. The white man gave us reasons why some of our traditions are bad and that we have to change it. Unfortunately, our fathers subscribed to it, which is being passed on from birth till birth until now. Well, the white man also gave us Facebook, which you're typing on. So let's take some more. Can we just take some more comments? Okay. These are all replies. Okay, Dramani says, no one have a thought over this. Nothing too can be done. We only have to respect tradition. Okay, enough of the Facebook comments?
Yes, let's get to our people.
You mean Dinah, Esther, and Bright?
Dinah, Esther, and Bright. We thank you very much, and I'm sure from the comments you can see the direction and the way people are thinking about all of this, and
I just say something?
The task a whole lot more.
Israel, I find, and I would be hypocritical if I didn't say that. It's not the way that you see what people are thinking. You see what men are thinking. Every single comment has been from a man. I have not seen a comment from, and you see, this is why I get so annoyed sometimes, is that these things don't actually affect you as a man. You don't menstruate. You don't know what it's like to be discriminated against on such a level. And so you come in and then you're quick to say, well, it's tradition, well, it's tradition, well, it's tradition. But if it affected you, would you feel that way? And that's the point that I'm making, that all of these comments are from men. And that is the number one problem with trying to change things like this in Ghana, is that these thoughts are so ingrained in the mind of men. And then we are powerless because we need to count on these men to fight for us. I mean, imagine the kind of dilemma that it puts you in. Anyway, that was the point. I'm done. I'm not going to say anything again. It's okay. Before I fight with Brides too, just because he's a man, or I fight with Israel.
All right, but thank you very much. I mean, there's a whole lot more that needs to be done. I'm sure you'd all appreciate. But we thank you very much for joining us in this conversation, and for what looks like the Offenso or River Offenso Declaration, and having you, Dinah Diko, a women's rights advocate, Esther Asenso, also a women's rights advocate and a PhD candidate, and Bright Appiah of Child Rights International, for joining us in this conversation. We're looking forward to the signing of the declaration. Thank you very much, and
Thank you.
We're looking forward to working with you on that. And I must put this on record that we had spoken with the Deputy Minister of Education, who had agreed to join us for this conversation, but he later says he declined. He cannot be part of this conversation. It's unfortunate, though, but yes, that's what
It's very, very unfortunate, and that's all I'm going to say.
All right, thank you. And you enjoy your day. We'll have more coming up on the AM show. Do stay tuned in.